The following compilation features unsettling and spine-chilling tales sourced from Reddit's horror communities. Reader discretion is strongly advised. These narratives may contain graphic descriptions, psychological distress, and themes that could unsettle sensitive individuals. Proceed with caution, as immersion into these eerie stories may provoke fear, unease, and sleep disturbances. Enter this realm of Reddit's creepy horror stories at your own risk, as the line between reality and the macabre may blur within these chilling narratives. Story 1. Someone tried to save me 158 times. When tragedy strikes, it unfolds in the most unexpected ways. There are no ominous narrations or suspenseful melodies. No hints that the ordinary will suddenly transform into an extraordinary event. In an instant, a cataclysm can reveal its devastating maw, leaving chaos and despair for those left to witness. The air was chilly in November, and amidst the anticipation of a 4-day Thanksgiving weekend, the impending doom of finals loomed, clouding our excitement. That morning, I was in my science class, doing my best on the final exam. Too quickly, in the blink of an eye, everything changed. The events that followed were both awe-inspiring and terror-inducing. As I recall, we were finalizing the evidence for our report when my ears popped as if I had rolled down the window of a speeding car. A jarring rumble shook the classroom, accompanied by a deafening blast that robbed me of breath. The fire alarm wailed as water rained down, drenching us. I sprang up from my desk with an odd adrenal focus. We hastily made our way toward the aisle, abandoning our finals. Surprisingly, we maintained a semblance of order. The fire alarm blared as our teacher guided us out, and we obeyed in a mix of fear and trust. Like frightened animals, we followed the teacher's lead, navigating the corridors to the nearest exit. We had to walk past my mom's classroom, and I wondered if I'd see her getting her kids out. As I turned the corner, her classroom came into full view, and what I beheld was a nightmare made manifest. My heart seemed to stop, yet its frantic pounding was louder than ever. My mother's classroom door, torn off its hinges, lay in a shattered heap against the opposite wall. The threshold was consumed by a furious inferno, raging uncontrollably. I was now the one to stand witness to this wake. I don't know what compelled me to charge into that blazing maw. Was it a delusion of invincibility? A desperate belief that I could save her like a superhero? Or was it a simple act of need, driven by an unexplainable force? I cannot say, even now. I pushed through the flames and smoke, and as soon as I crossed the threshold, the fire ceased its anger, descending the staircase with the grace of a stumbling infant. I hardly registered the loss of footing halfway down. Adrenaline coursed through my veins, dulling the pain as I tumbled, and I regained my balance on the final steps. And there, at the bottom step, an impossible coldness enveloped me. The chill of the air permeated my senses as I departed the bottom step. Inside the room, obscured by dense smoke, the cries of anguish echoed. A nervous sweat broke out on my brow as I ventured forward. Guided by the sound, the acrid stench of burning flesh and hair assaulted my senses, threatening to overpower me. Gradually, my eyes adjusted to the darkness, granting me the unwelcome gift of sight. I wish they had failed me. The horrifying images etched deeply into my psyche. Charred bodies strewn across the floor, their limbs twisted and contorted, some still smoldered, becoming consumed by thin lines of crimson that crawled greedily along their blackening skin, reducing it to ash. The scene was catastrophic. It was repulsive. A nauseating sensation crept up from within, that familiar prelude to vomiting. I fought to suppress it, driven by an instinct to reach the crying emanating from an overturned desk in the far corner of the room. That must be my mom. She's still alive, I thought naively. My path was obstructed by the lifeless forms of classmates. Deep down, my gut warned me to leave, but I ignored it. Almost reaching the desk, my attention was drawn to yet another body lying in my path. This one was slightly larger than the others. It took only a moment to realize the unthinkable. This was my mother. Her right side was gruesomely absent, Her eyes clouded with milky white, and her jaw hung slack. She had lost an arm and a leg. Dead. My mother lay lifeless at my feet. The sound of sobbing erupted again, originating from behind the desk. No discernible words, just heartbroken sobs. Setting aside my grief for the moment, aided by shock, I left my mother's side to reach this person. The true magnitude of the disaster had not yet fully sunk in, the realization that no one could have survived. The crying grew louder as I approached, echoing not only in my ears but in my thoughts. It drowned out the clamor of the alarms. It was as if I was ensnared in a waking dream, where the cries became my sole focus, blotting out every other sense. Reaching the desk, I cautiously peered behind it, my eyes drawn to a huddled figure in the corner. His blackened skin mirrored the others, and he possessed little remaining hair. Tremors coursed through his body as he faced the wall, his arms extended limply, wrists hanging from his forearms. "Hey!" I yelled. "Are you okay? Can you move?" I said as I maneuvered around the desk. Looking back on it now, it was incredibly obvious that he wasn't okay. No response. Perhaps the explosion had damaged his hearing. Instinctively, I reached out and grasped his hand. The moment our skin made contact, the crying ceased and the tremors subsided. Slowly, he began to turn his head towards me, his neck moving with jerky, disjointed snaps. And then I beheld his face. Leathery skin clung to his emaciated skull, while his wide eyes, milky gray and white, mirrored my mother's. Through a slackened jaw, brown teeth peeked out, devoid of lips. His broken nose sat withered upon his face, completely naked. His leathery skin continued down his skeletal frame, with patches peeling off, revealing a putrid yellow fluid oozing from the infected wounds. I stood there in shock, taking in his convulsions and heaves. Suddenly, his head rocked like that of a newborn, and he took a ragged, strained breath. Then, he let out a sound unlike anything I had ever heard. But that's not the right way to describe it. The sound triggered a sensation within me, a feeling that wasn't entirely my own. I was engulfed by an overwhelming grief, an intense pain that consumed me entirely. Guilt as I had never known washed over me, threatening to drown me in its depths. I recoiled from the desk, stumbling backward until I fell onto my mother's charred remains. A cloud of ash billowed forth, caressing my face as I gasped for air. I inadvertently inhaled the plume of my mother's ash. I vomited on myself, tears streaming uncontrollably. Crawling on my hands and knees, I distanced myself from the nightmare, my existence teetering on the brink. I crawled, and then ran once I regained my footing. I ran out of that room, up the stairs, through the engulfing flames, through the school, past my bewildered classmates. I kept running. I ran until my legs could no longer bear the weight of my body and my shattering reality. Just keep running. Eventually, I collapsed in a local park, where the police discovered me. The cold, crisp grass cradled my face, leaving damp imprints in unison with my tears. The officer who found me sat silently beside me in the field, offering no words of advice, nor encouragement. We both began to shiver as the cold crept into our bones. I laid in that field until I succumbed to exhaustion and fell into a fitful sleep. I was so utterly exhausted. When the officer drove me home, I awoke to a reality that felt both distant and surreal. The following year slipped away in a haze, an amalgamation of twisting memories and blurred moments. I found myself residing in my mother's home, under the temporary custody of my aunt and uncle. The settlement from the life insurance payout, locked away in a conservatorship, offered a glimmer of financial security. Grateful for their decision, I thanked my lucky stars that my aunt did not seize the opportunity to claim the money as her own. Instead, she handed me a substantial sum of cash. It was an overwhelming amount for a 17-year-old to possess while grappling with the weight of newfound responsibility. In due course, I was granted emancipation, propelled forward by financial freedom. Little did I know that this freedom would become a catalyst for a destructive spiral, deepening the void within my soul with every regretful choice. The passing months merged, as if time itself was nothing more than a fleeting illusion. I was constantly oscillating between moments of heroin-induced intoxication and near unconsciousness. My days were spent in a perpetual state of chasing a fragile equilibrium, and so, as predictable and anticlimactic as it may sound, I succumbed to the overwhelming grip of a heroin overdose. I vaguely recall the nature documentary playing in the background as I craved another hit, preparing the syringe. I found a suitable vein, and the liquid bliss coursed through my veins, flooding my senses. Was it my fifth hit? Sixth, more than I had ever done before. The rush surged through my body with an intensity I couldn't bear. My balance faltered, and I collapsed onto the couch, my head spinning in a disorienting haze. I slipped into unconsciousness, unaware of the vomit that spilled forth from my mouth. At that moment, I believe I was on the brink of death. In my haziness, I faintly recall the piercing scream someone entered the front door. I must have appeared as a visual embodiment of the death I had longed for. It was my aunt who discovered me in that state, a sight she never deserved to see. She was far too good to be exposed to the wretchedness that had become me. Rehabilitation became an inevitable path I had to tread. My therapist posited that the horrors I witnessed in my mother's classroom were projections of my mind, personifications of the hellish experiences I endured. In the ensuing months, I grappled with a profound sense of worthlessness. Despite the earnest efforts of those around me, weeks continued to bleed into months, and progress toward emotional and mental recovery became a slow, agonizing burn. No matter the tools and coping mechanisms I acquired, no matter the mental acrobatics I performed, I found myself sinking deeper into the abyss. The insidious cravings for substances clung to my heart with sickening tenacity. By the end of that year, I retreated into seclusion, abandoning my education and embracing a life of isolation. Depression became my constant companion, blurring the days into an indistinguishable haze. I traded one vice for countless others, escaping reality through endless hours of pornography and video games, despising every fiber of my existence late into the solitary nights. Even in sleep, I found no respite. My nights were tormented by relentless nightmares, unyielding in their pursuit of stealing away what little rest I had left. At my emotional nadir, I ceased to care for even my most basic needs. My body, an instrument of survival, was now perpetually hunched, bent by the weight of my deteriorating state. I had become a repugnant wreck, a physical manifestation of the turmoil within my mind. I was a mirror reflecting the distorted image of my shattered mentality. The battle against my demons was slipping through my fingers, and I was losing myself in the process. In time, my life embarked on a transformative journey, emerging from the shattered remnants of an existence that had unwittingly become my solace. It began with a simple spark, an eruption of laughter. It was not a mere chuckle or a fleeting smirk. It was a belly-deep laugh that reverberated within me. The sound itself was foreign to my ears, stirring confusion and exhilaration. At that moment, I felt immense pride swell within me. Soon after, I shed my former self, transitioning from a reanimated corpse to an animated being. My new addiction became growth, and I pursued it with fervor. I constructed a fortress, a barricade to withstand the relentless onslaught of my mind. I tamed the internal chaos that had consumed me, gradually reclaiming control over my destiny. With every strained step, I crawled a feeble yet indomitable way up that treacherous mountain, knowing I had to venture beyond my childhood home to nurture my emotional development. I decided without hesitation. I relinquished my home to my aunt, packed my belongings, and embarked on a journey to Florida. Florida became my homestead. I found refuge in a vacation cabin amidst the serenity of the Everglades. There were no neighbors for miles around, and the land belonged to a kind couple whom were seldom present. The cabin, nestled within a dense, humid forest, provided ample opportunity to confront my innermost thoughts. Aiding my recovery, though reclusive, I reveled in newfound freedom. The forest around me was a testament to nature's magnificence. It thrived with beauty, teeming with life and vibrant hues. Birds sang, insects hummed, and the sun set gracefully. It was a stark contrast to the desolate nights I had once known. Occasionally, I would venture to an ocean-fed creek a stone's throw away, indulging in peaceful fishing. With each passing day, I slowly fortified my resolve, gathering the shattered pieces of my courage. The journey ahead remained daunting, but still, a glimmer of hope illuminated the path ahead. I clung to the belief that someday, somehow, I would break free from the clutches of this fear. It was precisely what I had yearned for. My life had become my own again. Though the memories of that night still carried pain, they had become more bearable. I was on the verge of uttering those elusive words, "I am happy," until the nightly lamentations found me, the anguished cries piercing the silence, a relentless reminder of the entity that haunted me. Sleep became an elusive luxury, for as darkness descended, the wails shattered any chance of rest. Daylight offered a brief respite. The cries became a force that unleashed forgotten pain, shattering the barricade I had erected. The dormant rancor within me stirred, awakening with a vengeance. My inner turmoil returned, engulfing me in a tempest that left me gasping for breath. My resilience crumbled like sand slipping through trembling fingers. The laughter that once danced upon my lips died in my throat. I broke quickly, so quietly. Then, one night, I stirred from a nap that had inadvertently consumed me. A strange sensation tugged at my consciousness, rousing me from my slumber. The room was shrouded in stale silence, the clock displaying 1:26 a.m. It was the dead of night, yet mercifully devoid of the haunting cries. With cautious curiosity, I rose from my seat and made my way toward the front door. Spurred by newfound audacity, I recall thinking I should step outside, prove to myself that nothing is there, prove the crying is simply in my head. As I approached the door, I envisioned walking outside and wondered where I should go. That night, the air was eerily calm, devoid of the usual bug song. I pressed my face against the small window on the door, peering into the darkness beyond, fully expecting to find only an indistinct shadow. But to my horror, there it stood, staring back at me with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. Our faces were separated by a mere fraction of an inch of glass, locked in a macabre face-to-face encounter. A cacophony of screams erupted, shattering the once tranquil air and sending tremors through my home. The glow from the kitchen illuminated his face, etching its haunting contours deep within my mind. His quivering jaw moved erratically, a grotesque dance of opening and closing with each labored breath. Each exhale birthed a clinging mist, smearing the glass with intricate patterns, transforming its surface into eerie artistry. His vacant eyes remained fixed ahead, devoid of recognition, as if ensnared within the clutches of unyielding madness. With unsteady steps, he gradually retreated, his form shrinking into a crouched position mere feet away from my door. There was no denying the presence before me. Frozen in shock, I stood there, grappling with a maelstrom of emotions. Fear, curiosity, and twisted fascination intertwined, forming a turbulent whirlwind of conflicting impulses. Though an unsettling truth settled within me, there was no denying the raw reality of his existence. This was no figment of my imagination. It was a chilling encounter with a realm beyond comprehension. My scream tore through the air, an instinctual response fueled by primal emotions. No coherent words could encapsulate the overwhelming turmoil within me. Anger, fear, and frustration merged into a sickening sensation that gnawed at my core. I had grown tired of sleepless nights and a life that no longer felt like mine. I had escaped across the country to flee from this, yet he was, huddled just feet away, mocking my desperate attempt at solace. It felt like a cruel joke my own mind was playing on me. "Leave me alone," I shouted, my voice cracking as tears streamed down my face. "Please, just leave me alone!" My cries resembled the agonized wails of a wounded and trapped animal, raw and untamed. Outside, the creature continued its relentless screams, rising to its feet again with a disjointed movement. It approached my door, its contorted posture resembling the grotesque position of a late-stage tetanus patient, skin tearing as it leaned. "Leave me alone!" I yelled again, unleashing a surge of pent-up emotion that had been dormant for far too long. But my plea fell upon rotting ears that could not comprehend or sympathize. It reached my door. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind, over and over. I had imagined how I would confront and eradicate this embodiment of my deteriorating sanity. I had chosen this entity as the symbol of my mental decline, the effigy upon which my deserved future lay, flayed in a blood eagle-like fashion, offered to the altar of my current reality. Driven by panic and rage, I grabbed the fire axe above my table, my body moving mechanically as I propelled myself back toward the barrier that separated us. A wordless scream of terror, revulsion, and hatred erupted from deep within me as I crashed through the door, my clenched teeth unable to contain the overwhelming intensity of my emotions. The creature was struck by the door, its body forcefully pushed backward, eliciting a feral gasp from its throat. Now, I was determined to end it. Kill it. Kill me. Candle. Kill. The words reverberated in an unsettling loop within my mind, out of sync with each other, fueling my purpose as I prepared to face the culmination of my anguish. In a whirlwind of uncontrolled movement, I tumbled down the steps, my body flailing as I crashed onto the ground. Before I could fully process the fall, I found myself on my feet, instinctively rising without conscious thought, and there it was, face to face with me, its breath uncomfortably warm and sticky against my skin. The putrid stench of decay invaded my nostrils, causing me to recoil in demoralized repulsion. I felt my courage waver, and my resolve crumble. I realized I was not strong enough, not capable of facing this. I backpedaled until I was pressed against the wall of my house. Then it screamed, convulsed, and trembled before me, its milky eyes fixed on an unseen horizon, its hands stretched out, reaching for something beyond my comprehension. With that scream, a surge of courage and rage flooded my being. It was the same as it had been all those years ago in the school, an overwhelming flood of emotions that were not truly mine to feel. It's difficult to articulate, but I embodied those emotions and allowed them to engulf me, to consume me. Kill. The word reverberated relentlessly in my mind. Springing forward with a wild scream, I swung the axe with all my might, the blade sinking deep into its side. The sensation of bone deflecting the force of my strike is etched into my memory, never to be forgotten. Blood and other fluids sprayed from the wound as it took a few faltering steps to the side, pushed by the momentum of my assault. The creature ceased its cries, its tremors, its breath. Time stood still, and it finally turned to look at me. Fear held me captive under its gaze. We stared at each other, locked in a moment that felt like an eternity. Foul breath washed over me once more, seeping into my senses. Beyond that, nothing happened. We simply stood there, locked in a silent exchange. I willed my frozen bones to thaw, my mind transitioning from terror and frenzied rage to something else. It wasn't pride, but rather a different, indescribable emotion. Yet, it carried a sense of triumph, I believe. Unbeknownst to me, it had reached out and gently grasped my arm, its touch going unnoticed until it began to speak. "I never meant to scare you," he rasped, his voice torn and ragged, struggling to emerge between shallow breaths. "I'm sorry. This has to happen to you," it uttered, its words filled with agony and desperation. Tears welled up in its eyes, a flicker of pain crossing its face as its ragged hand clutched at the axe lodged in its new laceration. "Please, kill me," he wheezed, his plea reverberating in my mind and reaching my ears simultaneously. With its other hand, it gripped the axe and brought the blade to its neck. "Kill me, Candle. Kill."
Now!
The final word echoed like an explosion within my head as its hand pressed against my face. Everything plunged into total darkness for a fragmented moment as I swung the axe. Suddenly, I felt myself hurtling through space, a void engulfing me. The air grew cold, and the wind whipped past, intensifying the disorienting descent. I screamed in a frenzy of confusion and terror, my voice lost in the abyss. Downward I plummeted, faster and faster, the nauseating sensation overwhelming me. Did I die? Is this death? I'm dead. Thoughts of my imminent demise gripped my courage, but I resisted, unwilling to accept my fate just yet. In the distance, far below, a growing light pierced through the darkness. Fresh tears streamed down my face, blurring my vision and making it difficult to gauge the proximity of the light, and how much time remained before I would be halted by the unforgiving ground. But it was rapidly approaching. I squeezed my eyes shut, unleashing a scream that echoed through the void. In the face of imminent death, I summoned every ounce of defiance within me. I want to live. The words echoed in my mind, a fervent plea repeating like a mantra. I curled into a protective ball, bracing myself for the impending impact that would mark my brutal end. Seconds stretched into eternity as I awaited the inevitable. Then, with a soft and gentle thud, I collided with the ground, the impact akin to falling off a couch. A feeble whimper escaped me, carrying away the remnants of my shattered pride. Slowly, I uncoiled my limbs and remained still, a mix of confusion and exhaustion paralyzing me. Was this death, or had I somehow managed to survive? At the very least, I was conscious. I reached out with my hands, feeling the texture of the hardwood floor beneath me. I attempted to open my eyes, but darkness engulfed everything, rendering me blind to my surroundings. Rolling onto my back, I extended my arms as far as they would go, searching for walls that eluded my touch. Instead, only finding a formless nothingness. A new fear emerged as a creeping suspicion arose. Did I even have a face? With trepidation, I brought my unseen hands towards my face, and a sharp sting shocked me as my dirty, sweaty fingers met my open eyes. It burned, and a faint chuckle escaped my lips. Mingling with tears that continued to cascade down my face, I released a weak, triumphant sigh, throwing my arm in the air, and darkness claimed me once more, my consciousness slipping away. When I awoke, I found myself in an unfamiliar hallway, illuminated by ethereal torchlight. Glancing around from my position on the floor, I took in the details of my surroundings. The hallway stretched endlessly in both directions, its warped and aged dark wood floors covered in a thick layer of dust. On each side of me, 2 doors stood, adorned with handles clad in aged bronze. The peeling, curling white paint of doors cast small shadows that danced in the flickering flames. Ornate red and gold walls framed the hall, extending into the distance without interruption. The air hung still, thin and cold. I pushed myself upright, drawing a reflexive breath, just to find that my lungs refused to cooperate. I couldn't draw in the air, an unsettling revelation that further shook my fragile state. Yet, amidst the disquietude, an unexpected acceptance settled upon me. Maybe I truly am dead, I mused while massaging the space between my eyes, and perhaps this is limbo or some other place beyond the realm of the living. Standing before the doors, I brushed off the accumulated dust as my fingers traced the bronze knobs. I attempted to turn the knob of the door on my right. It remained resolute, refusing to budge with my attempt. I turned my attention to the door on my left, hoping for a different outcome. Yet, once again, my efforts proved fruitless. The doors remained firmly shut, denying me entry. A sense of resignation settled over me as I contemplated the possibility that I had indeed entered a land of limbo or purgatory, where the deceased wandered aimlessly, seeking answers and respite. If there were lessons to be learned or tasks to be fulfilled, I had yet to discover them. But the absence of purpose, the prospect of eternal nothingness, weighed heavily on my soul. With a deep breath, I made the conscious decision to venture further into the darkness, forsaking the dwindling light behind me. Hours turned into an indeterminate passage of time as I traversed the corridor, my hand trailing along beside me against the cold surface of the wall. Surprisingly, fatigue and hunger eluded me, further reinforcing the notion that I probably died. If this was the extent of my existence, an eternal cycle of aimless wandering, I yearned for something more. The prospect of mere nothingness, devoid of purpose or meaning, felt like a reality abandoned by the gods long ago. Determination and desperation mingled within me, urging me to maintain my pace and to keep moving forward despite the uncertainty. And then, a sudden burst of light ruptured the darkness behind me, catching me off guard. The icy tendrils of fear gripped my chest, causing me to flail and stumble, my yelp swallowed by the darkness. With a surprising display of grace, I flopped heavily on my stomach. I clambered to my feet and swiftly turned around. Propelled by a sense of desperate longing, I hurtled toward the newfound light, driven by an unspoken fear that it would fade if I didn't reach it in time. Desperation fueled my actions as I lunged for the handle of the nearest door, seeking the anchor to halt my momentum. The handle remained steadfast, unyielding, as it abruptly halted my chaotic trajectory. I clutched the doorknob with both hands, pouring every ounce of strength into my attempt to pry it open. I threw my weight against the door, pulled, hit, kicked, and pleaded desperately, but the door remained unafflicted. Exhausted and defeated, I crumpled against the door, collapsing to my knees. I buried my face in my folded arms. The tears flowed freely once again as a sense of hopelessness enveloped me. What was the point? There was nowhere to go, no escape from this damned place. I was trapped, imprisoned within my own personal purgatory. This was my punishment. Reality began to fracture, my veil of ignorance slowly lifting. Could I truly be dead? The realization dawned upon me, shattering the feeble illusion of safety and acceptance. I wasn't okay. I wasn't safe. The weight of my unease bore down upon me, threatening to consume what little resolve remained. In the face of uncertainty, I whispered the truth that echoed within my being. I'm not okay. I rolled onto my side, curling into a tight ball, clutching my legs close to my chest. I surrendered to the oceans that consumed me. I ceased all efforts, resigned to my fate. Time lost all meaning as I lay there, motionless, accumulating layers of dust upon my immobile body. Months or perhaps years passed in this frozen state. I remained frozen, a monument to despair and defeat. The weight of my surrender bore down upon me, and I grew stagnant in body and spirit. As time passed, a small voice emerged from the depths of my being, offering tiny shards of defiance. It urged me to continue, questioning why I should give up. The relentless nagging of that voice eroded the staleness of my resolve. And so, with great effort, I gave in to the persistent beckoning within. I began to stir, my brittle bones creaking and cracking in response to the tentative movements. Every inch of my being protested, muscles screaming as I defied the platitudes that had held me captive. The desire for something different, something more, ignited within me. It took time, but I managed to rise to a sitting position. My body clung stubbornly to the remnants of my self-imposed stagnation, resisting my will. But I knew I had to move. Just move. I whispered those two simple words to myself, a mantra in the stillness, with each painful twitch and every tear in my flesh. I pressed forward. The blinding light pierced through the darkness, and I quickly shielded my eyes. The hallway, once shrouded in darkness, was now ablaze with the furious glow of burning candles, illuminating every inch of the endless walls adorned with their white doors. Shielding my eyes from the searing exposure, I recoiled from the scorching heat that began to radiate from the flames. I peered through the gaps in my fingers, and a sight greeted me that filled my heart with renewed hope. There, at the end of the hallway, lay an exit, a definite continuation beyond these confines. A rush of motivation coursed through my veins, igniting a fire within my soul. Leaning against the wall for support, I willed my legs to carry me forward, pushing past the pain with each step. The longing to reach that final door consumed me, drowning out the agony. I moved with a shaky shuffle that evolved into a stiff, determined speed walk. In retrospect, I can only imagine the nightmarish image I presented, but at that moment, all I wanted was to reach the end, to embrace the promise it held. With each passing door, I caught glimpses of their numbered plaques: 37, 39, 41, 43. The numbers ascended. I found myself running soon enough. The blinding light soon seared through my closed eyelids, a new symphony of pain. Perhaps I should have gauged the distance to the end, but in my blind pursuit, I collided with the ending wall with a resounding thud. The impact broke my nose, and I tumbled to the floor, disoriented and wounded. As my body sprawled upon the ground, the once illuminated candles in the hallway extinguished one by one, enveloping the space behind me in impenetrable darkness. Yet, amidst the obscurity, one candle remained defiantly aflame, the candle beside the door labeled Wahan 58. Its flickering glow drew my gaze, anchoring me to the present. Candle. Candle. The word reverberated within the recesses of my mind, its significance echoing relentlessly. And then, like a distant echo from the past, a strained and familiar voice permeated my thoughts. Kill Candle, it urged, a haunting reminder of the encounters I had faced. The voice, bearing the same ragged quality that had sent chills down my spine before, emerged from the darkness, piercing the silence with its command. A low, ominous rumble stirred in the distance, a sound foreign and unsettling to my ears. It started as a mere murmur, barely perceptible, but gradually swelled in volume, intensifying with each passing moment. The air itself seemed to thicken and vibrate with distraught energy, a growing force that quelled the surroundings. I felt it from deep inside my being. It was the sound of impending doom, a creeping darkness that threatened to swallow everything in its path. As the rumble resonated through the depths of my being, a profound distress began growing within me. It crawled beneath my skin, coiling around my muscles and sinew with a chilling grip. The sensation of impending nothingness clawed at my very core, filling me with a deep-seated dread. It was a fear unlike any I had ever experienced, a realization that I stood at the precipice of an inevitable and irrevocable end. The weight of this knowledge settled heavily with a visceral stab of anxiety that sent tremors through me. The world around me seemed to hold its breath, as if bracing for the impending collision with an unimaginable force. I stood helplessly transfixed, caught between fight and flight, a deer in headlights. The rumble grew louder, reverberating with a resonance that shook very fabric of reality, and it quivered under its weight. With trembling hands, I clutched at the doorknob. My small rattles quickly became me desperately trying to twist it open, but the doorknob remained stubbornly locked. The rumble grew louder as the unstoppable force closed in on me. Panic surged within me, causing me to frantically shake the door with wild desperation. But still, it resisted, unyielding to my futile attempts. That feeling grew ever stronger, and I became ever more frantic. I felt as though I fell into the quicksand of insanity. Kill Candle. The words thundered in my mind, echoing over the impending roar that threatened to consume me. It was a command, a directive to extinguish the flame. In a moment of clarity amidst the chaos, I realized what I had to do. I reached out, smothering the candle's flame with my bare hand, and at last, the door swung open. I was violently thrust forward, pulled into the void. The deafening roar receded, replaced by a disorienting rush of motion as I spun and flailed, completely at the mercy of another unseen force. Control slipped from my grasp once more, leaving me to surrender to the unknown as I flipped and spun through the void once again. Abruptly, the tumult ceased, and I found myself standing outside my own house, a surreal tableau frozen in time. There, I witnessed an enigmatic moment, a version of myself suspended mid-swing, the axe poised to strike the creature's neck. It was a fractured moment of the reality I had left behind all that time ago, a moment frozen in space and time. Taking a hesitant step forward, I was abruptly hurled back into my own body, the fragments of my existence reuniting. Time resumed its course, and I felt the weight of the axe as it carried out its intended purpose. The blade connected with a solid, metallic impact, tearing a new rift in the fabric of reality. I was again plunged into a jarring darkness. The whirlwind of confusion was the only thing familiar anymore. The musty scent of familiarity, reminiscent of my high school days, filled the air, punctuating the otherwise suffocating silence. In an instant, my vision returned, but this time with a disorienting rush, accompanied by dizzying vertigo. I found myself standing in the classroom where my mother used to teach, a place I hadn't set foot in for years. Confusion clouded my thoughts as I turned my gaze to the left, and there she was, my mother, staring at me in disbelief. A collective gasp rose from the students, their eyes fixed upon me with fear and horror. The weight of their stares pressed upon me, making me acutely aware of the unusual circumstances I found myself in. I glanced at my feet in habitual embarrassment, and there, I noticed the axe embedded in the gas line, emitting an ominous hiss that sliced through the thick silence. My eyes darted back to my mother, and on her desk, illuminated by a solitary burning candle, my gaze fixated. The word echoed relentlessly in my mind, its significance growing with each repetition. Candle. The candle. The candle. In a reflexive surge of urgency, I released my grip on the axe, discarding any semblance of thought, and propelled myself toward the desk. But my efforts were in vain, for as my fingers reached out, a catastrophic chain of events unfurled before me. In an instant, the classroom erupted in a fierce eruption, an inferno that devoured everything in its path. The sheer force of the explosion shook the very foundation of reality, hurling me against a wall, my body crumpling behind a nearby desk, charred and broken. My form bore the scars of the blast, yet my consciousness stubbornly clung on. I felt pain unparalleled to any other I'd experienced so far. Amid the chaos, I gathered myself and began to crawl toward my mother's mangled figure. She lay there, torn asunder, yet desperately still clinging to life. With every ounce of strength left in me, I painstakingly dragged my injured body toward her, my movements a testament to sheer determination. My hand reached out, seeking connection, but instead encountered a severed limb. Undeterred, I reached my mother and she extended her remaining arm, seizing my hand with a desperate grasp, our bond unbroken even in the face of such devastation. "Mom!" I sobbed, my voice choked with anguish. Tears streamed down my face as I knelt over her broken form. "Mom, I'm sorry," I cried out, my words punctuated by deep sobs. "I'm so sorry."
"Mom!"
Her eyes met mine, and in that delicate moment, she mustered all she had to utter a sweet whisper. "I love you," she barely managed, a weak attempt at a smile gracing her lips, but as her grip weakened, her hand slipped away, surrendering to the pull of gravity. I collapsed once more, pressing my head against her scorching shoulder, the flames from her burning clothes licking at my tear-soaked eyes. At that moment, the white-hot pain of loss eclipsed any physical pain I might have felt. The realization struck with cruel clarity. I hadn't succeeded in extinguishing the candle. I had failed once again, repeating the cycle for the 158th time. The weight of my failure bore down on me, crushing my soul into a cloud of fine dust to be carried away with the hellfire that consumed my surroundings. I didn't deserve the reprieve of holding my mother. I needed to escape from the desolation I had wrought, crawling on hands stained with her blood. I retreated to the corner of the room, my arms hung limply at my sides, my body trembling with a mixture of guilt and revulsion. I didn't want to touch anything, especially not myself. I recoiled from my own skin, my hands, the instruments of her demise. I wanted to shed my skin as it pressed its decrepit form ever closer to my heart. "I killed my mom," I whispered, the words heavy with self-condemnation. I trembled uncontrollably, consumed by my otherworldly screams of anguish and sorrow that shattered the air. Suddenly, a voice pierced the chaos from behind me. "Hey!" it yelled urgently. "We have to get out! There's a gas leak." A hand reached out and grabbed mine. As I turned to face the source, a jolt of recognition coursed through me. I was staring at myself, another version of me, yet somehow different, younger. At that moment, I realized with terror that I had become the embodiment of the nightmare. I screamed a primal cry of disgust and horror, forcing the other me to retreat in a frightened flurry. Days have passed since then. After the younger me fled, I was pulled back to our timeline. This timeline, for the final time. I hope my journey was enlightening, entertaining. I hope you won't stagnate as I did. And if you ever find yourself stagnant, placated, absent, and it's the why that keeps you down, then you should also ask yourself, why not? Your reasons just might be enough to move forward again. Story 2. I don't remember having a dog named Muggles. When I was 23, I suffered from the worst nightmares. I would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in a cold sweat. The room spinning while faint pale light seeped into my bedroom, the grip of uneasiness grasping tightly as I gradually caught myself from the sensation of free falling, and after a few minutes my breathing would slow, my heart retreating back into my chest. The whole ordeal only lasted mere minutes, but in the moment, the experience felt like an adventure of epic proportions, an immersion into the depths of hell. I tended to let out a slight chuckle once my soul returned back to me, but that's when I would feel it, the slimy substance of something liquid running down my hand. At first I assumed it was sweat, but after turning on the lights would I see it, the drool. It was sticky, long strands of the slime stretching out as I pulled my fingers apart, droplets falling onto my bed leaving a deep grey stain, and my nose stung from the horrid stench, one similar to a rotting piece of meat. That first night I tried brushing the bizarre occurrence to the side, rationalizing the event to nothing more than my mind playing tricks on me, just simply remembering the night wrong. But when it happened the next night, my stomach sank, leaving me feeling as if I had swallowed my own tongue. Though I did my best to explain it away, telling myself that it was a part of my nightmare, perhaps sleep paralysis, the thin thread of reality being blurred by the dream world. All that had shattered after about a week of the same thing happening, and I had soon realized it was occurring at the same hour, 3:33 a.m. It eventually got to the point that I didn't want to sleep, afraid of waking up to that disgusting wet substance. Even worse were the bits and pieces I could remember from the reoccurring nightmare, and glimpses of two large darkened eyes staring at me, eyes that seemed to menacingly call out my name. The mental sound muffled. I began to change my sleep schedule, staying awake as long as possible, making sure to pass that abysmal hour of 3:33 to then collapse into bed around 4. This surprisingly enough worked. Well, not completely. I was left tired in the mornings. My boss threatened my job due to my lack of performance, sending me home to get some rest. I know it was supposed to be a punishment, but I gleefully took the reprimand and headed home, enthralled with the premise of sleep. For the first time in weeks, I was able to get more than 10 hours of rest, making sure to set my alarm for 2:30 a.m. Even though nothing ever happened to me while I was awake, I would still feel the odd sensation of being watched, and for that hour, I kept my bedroom door shut while remaining in bed with the lights on like some scared child. My family could see how tired I was, fatigue melting off my face, my skin more sickly than usual. The dark, puffy bags that weighed under my eyes concerned my mother. It had been some time since I moved out of my parents' house, living alone in the inner city for the last 2 years, and not a week would go by without my mum calling to check up on me. Once she noticed that I was no longer taking her calls, she made the 2-hour drive to visit, and that's when she saw the crumbling form of her once vibrant boy. I explained to her of why I didn't want to sleep, telling her about the nightmares, the drool in those eyes. To my astonishment, she laughed, brushing aside all of my worries, telling me that this has happened before, that I had the same problem when I was a boy, no more than 3 years old, that I complained about a night visitor. She told me it was because of our family dog Muggles, that he would sleep in my room panting all night as I slept, occasionally licking my hand. She told me that it was quite traumatizing to me for whatever reason, because I complained about those same dreams for the next few years. I asked her why couldn't I remember any of it, or better, why couldn't I remember Muggles? She didn't have a good answer, only telling me eventually I grew out of it, that the only other time I had a similar issue was when I was 13. She remembered on one of those nights I was so terrified that I slept in their room next to their bed for a week. I was left confounded of how none this rang a bell. My mind clouded with a haze of uncertainty, but a bit of relief surged through me, understanding that apparently this had happened before, meaning it will come to an end. My mother could see that gleam of reassurance sparkle in my eye, and she smiled, caressing my cheek with her hand, sending a wave of warmth down my body. She left shortly after that, telling me to remember it wasn't real, that Muggles never would have hurt me. I felt comforted but didn't take any chances, and I stayed awake until 4 a.m., promptly falling into a deep sleep. For the next few days, I spent time writing down any memories I could remember from my childhood, trying to recall any moments that would have been traumatizing. I read online that sometimes our minds block out negative experiences, something about denial or coping. It was psychological mumbo-jumbo, but I guess there was some merit to it. I called my older sister and asked her about Muggles, asked what type of dog was he, or was it a she. My sister didn't tell me much. She was already in her late teens when I was 3, so she didn't pay much attention to my existence. I was what you called a surprise to my parents when I was born, and in my mind I could just picture the expressions on both of their faces when finding out I was expected, them being already in their late 40s. My father didn't hide his disappointment when it came to me. He didn't mistreat me or anything like that. It was more of his lack of enthusiasm when it came to anything I did. Winning the spelling bee in 3rd grade wasn't much of a big deal, since both my sister and older brother had done the same. So I guess by the time it got to me, he was a bit jaded. Sometimes I would catch him just looking at me with a stare of indifference, almost of intrigue, as if something was going to pop out of me at any moment. I tried talking to him, but all he ever gave me was the typical, "Sure, I'm proud of you, son," kind of responses. Like I said, he wasn't mean or abusive, just distant, a floundering spirit that watched me grow from afar while my mother did the nurturing. After a few weeks, I grew tired. Dark rings festered under my eyes. The gravity of merely keeping my eyes open felt as if each lid was holding up the earth itself. It was obvious I needed more sleep, my sanity dangling on a thread. The threshold swiveling in the breeze, where at times things seemed normal, but others, reality seemed to blur into abstractness, giving off the impression of something mechanic was happening behind the veneer of my home. So I decided to give in to my fear and indulge. I figured perhaps I could remember more about that nightmare. Maybe it had clues of that damn dog. Muggles. In the back of my mind, I created some fictional creature that morphed in and out of reality, taking the shape of a dog that apparently once belonged to me. I thought this entity was haunting me, licking my hand only when I slept. Maybe I needed to be asleep when it came, something similar to how ghost hunters only saw apparitions when it was dark. I decided to keep a small notebook next to my bed with a pen, ready to jot down any memories. As you can guess, I awoke in the middle of the night. It was that dreadful time, 3:33 a.m. Before turning on the lights, I could already feel the squishy fluid swimming around my hand, globs of drool slopping down onto my bed. My heartbeat accelerated, and I could feel tears form on the edges of my eyes. I anticipated this, but in my inner thoughts, I was hopeful that just maybe it was over, that this curse had passed, and I would awake to the sun slipping into my room, bathing me in certainty. Reality hit hard, and I knew there was no escape. No easy way out other than trying to solve what was happening to me, and that's when I remembered the notebook, but more prolific, I remembered the dream. It was still fresh on my mind, and I quickly reached over to my nightstand, writing down every detail I could still remember. Large dark eyes, reflective black skin. It climbs. It's funny how the memory of a dream can fade so quickly. It's like mist that dissipates when trying to grab a piece of its softness. There was one last thing I wrote down before forgetting, something I felt was important, and that was the sound it made. It would hum. I quit my job shortly after that night. I needed to get away, but to where was the real question. This curse was following me. I figured no location would be safe. Though, there was only one place that I could think of when it came to shelter, and that was home. I knew my parents wouldn't have liked it. Well, at least my dad. My mom, on the other hand, would be through the roof with glee. But I decided to move back home for the time being until figuring out what was wrong with me. Or at least until this episode of madness passed. To my bewilderment, both my parents welcomed me with open arms, and to be honest, I was put off by my father's demeanor. He was acting too nice, like someone that says all the right things during small talk. I took my old room. Nirvana posters still hung on the wall, while the cheap glow in the dark sticker stars that I stuck on my ceiling years ago remained in orbit. It was all how I remembered. I explained to my mother that I just needed rest. that the night terrors were overwhelming. She hushed me before I could completely finish what I was saying, hugging me. I felt so loved that first day, and I questioned why I had ever left home in the first place. I suppose we all leave. That's what baby birds do. Fly away and start the cycle of life all over. But what if that cycle is hindered by a darkness? Some force that brings you back to the best? I know I was being too philosophical about the whole thing. It was dreams, but then again, what was that substance? That first night I was hesitant to fall asleep. I stayed awake till practically the hour, but then gradually slipped into sleep without realizing it. I awoke to the smell of bacon sizzling. I had slept without any interruptions. No slime or headaches, but more delightful. I felt rested. I headed downstairs where my mother was preparing breakfast, and I was elated to tell her about my night, that I had finally gotten some sleep. Of course she was happy for me, telling me that all I needed was home to remedy any illness, and for whatever reason those words got me thinking. If home really was the answer, then why did my nightmares originate here? After breakfast, I asked my mother if there were any pictures of Muggles. Maybe seeing it would trigger more memories. She told me that there were none, that sadly any pictures we had of it was destroyed a long time ago. I questioned why they would have been destroyed, but the explanation was simple. It happened when my father was fixing up the attic where the photos were kept. He accidentally spilled paint thinner on the boxes that housed them, ruining them completely. In the moment, I felt like telling my mother how convenient that was, but stopped myself. Instead, I asked another question on something I picked up on my mother saying. She had called the dog Muggles it. Did she not remember if it was a male or female? This question actually caused her to pause for a moment, digesting it thoroughly, as I could see her eyes draw upwards with deep thought. She then laughed and said that she couldn't remember, that obviously it was one or the other. The second night was much like the first, though this time I was more confident at getting sleep, so I went to bed early. I didn't remember dreaming, just waking up once again to sizzling bacon. This went on for about a week. Nothing eventful happened. My father still pretended to be happy with my visit. Then a strange epiphany hit me like a bag of bricks. The nightmare of that entity seemed to be gradually vanishing. I had to keep reading my notes of what I saw. Large dark eyes, reflective black skin. It climbs. This was the only way for me not to forget. It was as if someone was pulling the dreams right out of my head, and even though I felt rested, I still felt disturbed, but in a different way. With my life now returned to normal, I decided to head back into the city, telling my folks I was leaving, but right before doing so, I went to talk to my father, alone. He was still masquerading around as this jovial parent. The facade made my stomach turn. I ignored his smiles and asked him about the dog. He stumbled over his words, almost surprised that I would bring that up with him. He told me that I loved that dog, that it had a habit of licking my hand while I slept. I nodded along, listening intently, and that's when I noticed something about my father. There was something in his mouth, and I only saw it for a split second, but it looked like a finger, a black one. I closed my eyes tightly, trying to wash away the delusion, but something was not right. I could feel it in the pit of my gut. The way he kept talking without saying anything, just gibber-jabber, mindless dribble. I kept staring at his mouth. There was something in there. I was sure of it, but after a while I think my father noticed my intense stare, and he began looking away while talking. Maybe I was going insane. Perhaps I had permanent brain damage from this ongoing sleep dilemma. Right before leaving our conversation, I asked him if he remembered what type of dog was Muggles. His eyes widened, and he remained quiet for several seconds. A type of guilt ran off of his face, and for a moment I saw his lip quiver from unease. I then knew there's something going on, and whatever it was, I couldn't trust my father. He told me he couldn't remember, and I left it at that. Before leaving, I took a box of some old drawings that I kept hidden behind my bed. It was my secret stash of artwork, things only for my eyes, and I figured I would review them when getting home. My mother was sad to see me leave, while my father, well, he no longer looked so joyful. His eyes interrogated me with suspicion, offering out a handshake to bid me farewell. Entering the city, I felt the subtle stench of nausea form in my nose. The contrast of flourishing trees being taken over by monumental skyscrapers was daunting. almost as if the grim reality of insomnia awaited my return, and the endless windows from each building acted as eyes, all watching me return as I drove past. My apartment stood the same. It felt cold and suffocating. Almost immediately did I miss my parents' home. I swallowed my trepidation and prepared some dinner, scouring through the fridge for anything edible. I decided to go through the box of artwork shortly after, and I sat on my bed in hopes of finding some insight to that dog. Nostalgia washed over me with each drawing. Some were of me and my family standing in front of our home with a cartoonish sun blazing above. As I put aside each drawing, I saw the bright, vibrant colors slowly shift into darker tones. The sun no longer yellow, but a dark red. The trees withering, and I sat confounded, not remembering any of these morbid drawings. Finally, after forcing myself to continue looking through the box, did I find what I was looking for. I believe I found Muggles. It was a drawing of me asleep in bed while this blob of darkness lingered at my hand. It looked nothing like a dog or even an animal for that matter. I turned to the next drawing, it being similar. A vague doodle of black lines sitting next to my bed as I slept. Sometimes that black thing would be on the wall or even above my bed. There must have been several drawings depicting this creature, and I knew this entity was never my dog. The last one was the most vivid, the sight running chills down my spine. It was a close-up of its face, the face that I have been dreaming of. I don't know how long I stared at the drawing, but the sun was out when I first began, rifling through the box, and before I knew it, darkness had wrapped itself around my walls. I kept having flashes while looking at the drawings, memories somehow flooding back in. Me awakening to that thing licking my hand and my father screaming. It was like an endless loop. 3 memories flickering over and over. Licking, screaming, and eyes. 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 What the hell was happening to me? I threw the drawing to the floor, and I got up from bed running to the bathroom to vomit. The drawing was of a face, but it wasn't of my father or a dog, but some creature, and I use the word creature half-heartedly because this thing was something else. In my childish hand, I drew the figure with 2 large, glistening eyes, an oval-shaped head, but the thing that haunted my attention the most were its teeth. They weren't actually teeth, but mandibles protruding from its face. Mandibles that looked similar to that finger I saw in my father's mouth. I lost myself in deep thought pondering as to why I couldn't remember any of it. Why in my lost memory was my father screaming? I went over to my couch and sat for a few hours while drinking a beer, trying to make sense of the whole thing. Glimpses of those abysmal eyes staring at me from every dark corner. I needed to get rid of the drawing. I wanted to burn it, but I decided tossing it out the window was the better option. I turned on all the lights to my apartment, making sure any shadow that danced in my periphery faded, only leaving a space of certitude. I kept drinking. I ran through a 12-pack without a blink, pounding one right after the other. Eventually, I fell asleep on the couch. My head leaned to the side, spilling all of the built-up saliva onto my shirt. I'm pretty sure I was quite a sight, and while my body lay limp in the real world, I dreamt of my father in the realm of slumber. I didn't know if it was a dream or maybe a memory. It was of me in bed, halfway asleep, as my father stepped into my room. The light from the hallway over cast his face, blurring out any facial features. He stood at the doorway, just watching me sleep, making a weird humming noise while his head violently trembled. I couldn't move, but a sense of dread erupted in me, and I could practically feel my chest cave into my stomach. I wanted to call out to him, ask him what he was doing, but I remained terrified, frozen, unable to even mutter a word. That's when I heard a whimper of what sounded like a dog. Soon I felt something aggressively grabbing my hand, redirecting my gaze to the side of the bed, and that's when I realized in the dream I wasn't a child, but my adult self. I then heard the sound of little feet scuttering on the wall as if something was climbing, and then I woke up. It was still dark out. I was trying to catch my balance as the alcohol still coursed through my body, and as my vision adjusted to reality, I noticed all the lights to my apartment were off. I was thrown into pitch darkness. Then that sound of scuttering little feet echoed throughout my living room, it causing me to jump to my feet. I looked around but saw nothing, my eyes trying to make sense of the sound. I reached over and turned on the small lamp that sat on a corner table. The shadows that menacingly paraded around in my periphery faded. Then those small tapping sounds bellowed out once again, but only this time I could hear it was coming from around the couch. I slowly crept closer out, stretching my neck to get a peek of what the noise was. My head still swirling from the booze, I gulped heavy, holding my breath, thinking some nightmarish beast would be staring up at me, but I saw nothing. Just an empty floor. By this point I felt as if I was loosing my marbles. The nightmares and the bizarre wet hand was too much to handle, but that's when I noticed the slip of paper protruding from underneath the couch. There indeed was something there after all, and I crouched down to retrieve it. To my horror, it was the drawing of that creature, the one I had thrown out the window only hours ago. Something brought it back. After that, I was back to my old miserable self, not sleeping a wink, making sure to stay awake as much as possible. I guess you could say my life was in shambles, crumbling to the lowest of lows, and I only wished that whatever this episode of misery I was experiencing would soon be over. It seemed like my sleep issues happened every 10 years, so that meant there was an end in sight, and I wouldn't have to worry about this until I was 33. The thought made me shiver, since the time that I would always awake to was 3:30, making me think turning 33 was the ultimate goal for whatever haunted me. Thoughts of my father acting so strangely infested my mind for the incoming days. Remembering how his words sounded somehow rehearsed, and that finger wiggling in the back of his throat. Was I really going crazy, or was there something more to what was happening? I decided to keep the drawing of that entity, not wanting to throw it out again, thinking that somehow, whatever created those tiny steps before would only bring it back to me, like some grotesque game of fetch. I stashed the drawing in the bottom of clutter I kept in the closet, hoping to get it out of my sight, but somehow I felt those devilish eyes watching me through the pile of mess, its stare lingering on my every move. I knew that I couldn't wait any longer, that if I was going to get through whatever torment I was suffering from, it was going to be through my own will. So I devised a plan, one that probably didn't make much sense, but in my sleep-deprived state it sounded genius. When I was a kid, my father put me in Little League. I wasn't the best catcher or even a fast runner, but one thing I did seem to possess was tremendous strength when it came to batting. I was the only kid that could hit a home run in any given game, and back then, my father was full of life, celebrating my small victories. This was probably the only time I can remember feeling close to him, and after hitting a walk-off game winner, he gifted me with a Luciville slugger that was passed down to him from his father. It was beautiful, the wood feeling natural in my hand, and I remember fantasizing of how many homers I would hit in the incoming years. But as time passed, my relationship with my father changed, his interest in me dwindling. My excitement for the game gradually shifted, and I threw my grandfather's slugger in the closet, where it remained for years until bringing it to my apartment out of the sheer thought of memories. Now that same wooden bat had a new purpose, one that was going to save my life and sanity. I sat in bed the next night, watching the time on my phone slowly change, waiting for the usual hour to approach. I began writing down all of the events I had experienced, not knowing if what I had planned was going to work. I made sure that I was fully awake. I must have drank about 3 Red Bulls after midnight, preparing myself for what was to come, and as 3 a.m. approached, I put away my notebook, turned off the lights and lay in bed. As the darkness fluttered around me, I pondered of what my father was doing, and I held my blankets tightly as it swaddled me into the perfect cocoon. Next to me in bed was my grandfather's Louisville slugger, caressing the side of my body, its stiffness making me shift my body around. I was going to pretend to sleep, hoping whatever Muggles was would come to me as it always had, and when it did, I was going to kill it. Even though my clock was digital, I could still hear the second hand of an analog clock thundering in my head, my anxiety spiking higher than Mount Everest. Time seemingly to slow while I watched it expire. I needed this nightmare to finally end, for this monster to go away. When the time hit 3:30, I contemplated if I was doing the right thing. What if Demon was too strong? What if I only angered it? Or what if it never came and perhaps I really was just imagining everything? As I kept thinking of such things, I heard those same scuttering taps from a few days earlier approach. It was coming from outside my bedroom, and that's when I closed my eyes, pretending to be asleep. I breathed heavy, mimicking the natural circadian rhythm I would have, and I just waited. I made it easy. I outstretched my hand on the outside of the bed, it hovering over the floor for easy access. With my other hand, I cradled the Luciville slugger, sweat making my grip a bit slippery. I slightly opened one of my eyes and could see a silhouette standing at my door, similar to my dreams. The figure had the shape of my father, that was for sure, and like my dream, it began to shake, its head violently, swaying around like some broken marionette, though I remained still. I then saw the dark figure tilt, its head backwards as its stomach began to pulsate. I could hear the sound of bones cracking, guts shifting as if the person was about to vomit something horrid. Then I noticed those ghastly fingers protruding from what I can assume was the mouth of my father. It was climbing out of him like some slug that crawled, its way out of a decrepit hole, and to my horror, I got to see the size of the creature. It was massive. By this point, I knew it was my father, and I almost blew my cover by calling out to him, but I held my tongue as the monster continued slithering its way out, and soon it was free, dropping my dad's body to the floor like some discarded banana peel. Then quickly that thing scurried away from sight, only leaving the sound of those little tapping feet as clues to know where it was. I kept my eyes shut, only allowing my ears to follow it, and I could tell it was climbing the walls. If I didn't know better, the thing was precisely over me on the ceiling, most likely staring at me sleep. I gripped the slugger even tighter but held my breath. I wanted to tremble. I wanted to scream, but I knew all this had to end, and soon I felt the creature licking my hand. During games when it was my turn to bat, I would get extremely nervous, to the point of me leaving the park, but my father would stop me, doing his best to calm my nerves. He told me to ignore the noise, to isolate it out, and the best way to do so was to slowly count to 3, but to do it in my head. My father's words rang through as the beast kept licking my hand. I slightly cracked open my eyes and peered through the darkness. There it was, Muggles in all its glory. There was the black, glistening eyes with an oval-shaped head, but even more terrifying was its oversized mandibles. It was clear the thing was gnawing at my hand, and I mentally prepared myself for what was to come. Then counted to 3. The next few minutes zipped by like a blur. I couldn't tell you exactly what happened. All I remember is swinging and hearing the sound of glass shattering. Crack. Then whimpering, the whimpers of what sounded like a dog. I don't remember how much time had passed, but the next memory I have is of standing over the dead body of whatever the hell this creature was, and now with the lights on, I could clearly make out all its features. To make it plain, it's simple, it was a giant bug. A monstrous insect that only lived in the depths of hell, and somehow it made its way to Earth. To me, now the bastard was dead, white fluid flowing out of its cracked skull. I didn't know what to make of it, and during this time I had forgotten about my father's body. That was until he started coughing, him coming back to life. He was disheveled, memorized to the whole situation, not knowing exactly what had happened, but aware of coming to my apartment. Apparently Muggles had the ability to take possession of my father's body, only leaving him as a passenger in his own skin. He was relieved that the beast had been slayed, and we hugged for minutes, both jovial to it being dead. My father filled in all the missing gaps to my memory, telling me when I was 3 years old he would hear me crying in the middle of the night, complaining about our family dog licking my hand. Since we didn't have a family dog, my father knew it was something else. So he waited in the middle of the night to see what was happening, and that's when he saw Muggles. It left my father in shock seeing such a thing, and he screamed out in pure devastation, only for the monster to attack him. It seemed as if the insect somehow burrowed its way into my father, taking control of his body. He said that he could feel the beast inside of him, but somehow it hibernated, only revealing itself every 10 years. Apparently, the creature had the ability to control the thoughts of people, making my mother and siblings think we actually had a family dog. Throughout the years, my dad grew a connection with Muggles and knew just how much it desired me. It wanted me, not my father, but used him as a vessel to bond with. He said that there was something about me it detected long ago, and it was going to wait as long as it took. Well, now the monster is dead, so I guess you could say I won. At least I thought I won. All this happened when I was 23, but now I just recently celebrated my 33rd birthday. The nightmares haven't come back, but I feel that something is off, as if I can hear a voice, maybe voices. I always remember my father's words of ignoring the noise, and I count to 3, but even then, the words only get louder. I don't know exactly what is happening to me, but the other day, I felt a tickling sensation in the back of my throat, and I ran to the bathroom to stare at myself in the mirror. I saw something that looked wickedly familiar. I saw fingers in the back of my mouth. I don't know what that creature that went by Muggles wanted with me, but whatever it was, it has affected me. Maybe I am turning into it, or perhaps somehow it lives inside of me. Maybe that's what it was doing when licking my hand. Whatever the case, I am documenting everything. If I live or die, I guess doesn't matter. Just know if someone tells you about having a dog, you don't remember. Understand it might have been another Muggles. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If you dare to explore further, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling tales of horror and the supernatural. Remember, the shadows hold endless mysteries, waiting to be unveiled. Stay tuned for more bone-chilling stories as we continue to traverse the eerie depths of the unknown together. Until next time, may your dreams be free from the haunting echoes of our tales. Or perhaps not.